Following on from my video last week looking at the highly underrated DC Icons line from DC Direct, looking at the Batman and Batgirl figures, today I'm going to be taking a look at the Joker and Harley Quinn offerings in this line. As noted in the last video, the problem with this line connecting with this audience seems to have largely come down to the scaling of the figures themselves. They are produced in a 5-inch scale, which is largely incompatible with most collectors' collections of action figures, which tend to be usually in the 6-inch or the 7-inch scale, or much smaller in the 3 3/4 inch. The 5-inch scale doesn't really apply to a lot of modern toy lines. And whilst ultimately this gamble didn't pay off, it's a shame because there were some very nice figures produced as part of the lineup. So let's get into it and have a look at the Joker. As we can see, the figure is presented in that pretty standard style of packaging, consistent in this line. It's quite a bland line in terms of images. There's not really any illustrative images whatsoever. It is relying mostly on that window display there of the figure, which is pretty attractive. A lot of the colour scheme is quite bland and simple, but very clean. The side panel always seems to represent the biggest loss here in my opinion, just because they just stick a number of the release on. In this case, the Joker of course is number 14. It is indicating this is specifically the Joker from A Death in the Family, which is of course a very, very famous representation of the Joker. But all in all, it's a little bit bland, and it's a real shame that they couldn't have put a comic book image from this story on there. It would have made it a lot more attractive when it was put on display on the shelf. The reverse of the packaging is probably the most fun, the most colourful. We actually see some of the other figures in this wave, and it's quite attractive. It's quite nicely artistically arranged, but again, probably isn't the most dynamic presentation to put on display. First impressions of the figure himself, though, once he's been liberated from his packaging, is pretty good. He looks the part, definitely. Really like that they've opted to give him his trench coat, and of course that trilby. I really, really like this look for Joker. I think it looks really solid, and I think they've done a pretty awesome job of the head sculpt. That face there, that big grin, the teeth, very, very nicely sculpted, brilliantly painted, especially if we look around the eyes. Just very, very smooth, fantastic paint apps. This looks really, really good. The sculpting of the torso is a little bit bland, a little bit basic. There's not an awful lot of detail here. For example, we can see some of the buttons, we can see his necktie, and of course he has his carnation in his lapel there, which all has that sculpting. It's not brilliantly expanded upon in terms of the paint apps. A little bit of application here and there could have really made this pop a lot more. But as it is a little bit simple, but nevertheless certainly does the job. It's quite colourful and brighter and looks the part. The trilby is sculpted in as part of the head. You can't remove it, but I think that's probably for the best. It's much better to have a fixed hat that looks good than one that's constantly flopping off and getting lost. And the raincoat is made of a soft rubber as well, so it's pretty flexible to accommodate the articulation. Likewise, the legs and feet are nicely moulded. I particularly like the spat design. I think these are well painted and look pretty sharp, and the legs are appropriately much thinner and skinnier than we'd seen in other figures in this line. So again, perfectly appropriate for the Joker, which I like. If you saw my previous video, there won't be any surprises when it comes to the articulation scheme, but I will run through it once again here. So there is a ball joint in the head, so it allows the head to spin right the way around if you want to, and yes, that rubber collar will allow you to spin that head right the way around, which is great. And he can also nod up and down a good distance. Well, he can certainly nod down. Doesn't really look up too much beyond eye level, to be honest. Now, he does also have ball joints in the shoulders, so his arms can kick up and out, which is great. It's complemented by an upper bicep swivel, double jointed elbow, so that hand can get right back to the head there, which is brilliant. And there is finally a pin swivel in the wrist, so of course the hand can rotate 360 degrees and it can hinge forwards and backwards as well. Now, one piece of articulation that is missing from this figure is the chest articulation that allows the figures to normally turn from side to side. This is completely missing on the Joker. All he has is the ab crunch, which will allow him to bend forwards and backwards a pretty decent range. It's not spectacular, but it's not bad. He can bend forwards a little bit, I suppose. Not really going back too far though, in all truth. He then does have a ball joint in the hips, so he can kick his legs out to the side. He can kick them forwards, however he can't really bend them back too far, and that's not because of the coat per se, but it's because they tend to pop out of place. Now, he does have double jointed knees, so they can kick right the way back, which is good. And then finally he has that ankle pivot as well, allowing the foot to move forwards and backwards and from side to side. He also comes with a handful of goodies, perhaps not as much as I might like, because I think the Joker is one of those characters that does lend himself to lots of different accessories, but he does come with some crucial ones. He has 3 extra right hands. I'm not sure why they've neglected the left hand so much, but there you go. He also comes with his Tommy gun and, of course, crowbar. Of the 2 weapons he comes with, my personal favourite is the Tommy gun. I think this is very nicely sculpted and very well painted as well. There's a number of different washes running through this, so it looks really nice and tight, to be honest. And it fits into his grip quite nicely, although it does take a bit of perseverance. It's not quite as smooth as you might hope, but he can get his finger onto the trigger. And then, of course, he has the crowbar, which again, nicely sculpted, nicely painted. Again, doesn't fit quite as snugly into his grip as you might hope, but if you persevere, he can hold it quite comfortably. In terms of a scale comparison, here he is standing next to DC Universe Joker. As you can see, he's just fractionally smaller, but there's not actually a huge world of difference between the two, and I have to say, of the two, I think I probably prefer the DC icons. All in all, I think this is a really nice figure. I'm quite fond of him. I really like this look for the Joker. I think it's pretty much spot on. If I'm being critical, it's a little bit oversimplistic, I suppose, but all in all, I think they've done a very nice job of him. Next up, we have Harley Quinn. Harley Quinn actually came before the Joker. She's number 13 in the line. And again, we see the same basic, simple packaging design. The only real difference here is the colour scheme is red rather than purple. And of course, there's a different lineup of figures on the back. Now, this is of course Harley in her original outfit, as first modelled of course in Batman the Animated Series, but the figure itself is actually meant to be based on her appearance in No Man's Land, which I believe was the first time this character was introduced to the main comic book universe. This suits me down to the ground. Her original look is how I tend to think of this character, being a big fan of the animated series of course, so I really like this particular look. I think it works really well, and I'm really glad to have this version of the character alongside my Joker. It utilises the pretty basic female body mould for this line of figures, but it looks pretty well done. It's very nicely painted. I like some of the nice individual details, like the diamonds that are on her arms and on her legs. I think they're very neatly applied. It looks pretty much spot on. There's some particular details that are unique to Harley, of course the head sculpt and that rubber collar there as well, along with the cuffs and the boots, and I think all in all the presentation is pretty much spot on. Now, the articulation scheme is pretty much identical to what we saw with Joker, but I did just want to demo the fact that she does have that upper diaphragm swivel there that's missing on the Joker, so of course she can move from side to side and lean from side to side very comfortably. In terms of accessories, Harley does of course come with some unusually fun ones, but she also has her basic extra hands, so she has 2 extra left hands and 1 right, along with her cork gun and giant mallet. I love both of these accessories. They are definitely representative of the spirit of the character, and I think there's something really larger than life and fun and slightly ridiculous about these accessories, and they look really good, nicely sculpted, nicely painted, and she holds them perfectly in her grip, which is pretty much spot on. So love this. I think they've done a very nice job. So in summary then, these are very nice additions to this line. They're bright, colourful, true to the spirit of their characters in the comic books, and they look like a lot of fun. They're a little simplistic when it comes to the paint apps and the moulding on their bodies, but when it comes to the head sculpts and their accessories, they're pitch perfect. If you enjoyed this video, please do give it a like, and remember to subscribe as there'll be plenty more videos soon.